Diane, can we move into your publication journey? Every time we speak to authors, we're always interested to find out their individual stories. I think every author has got their story as to how they came to be published. Um, Now, you and I met through a local writers group in Brisbane, and I remember there was a period where we would talk and would over a cuppa after the meeting, and I remember you were kind of expressing your kind of frustration, almost can I say a sense of hopelessness that you're thinking, I'm never going to get this thing published. And
Mm.
as we spoke about off camera before, that your first manuscript was actually your second published book, The Bracelet.
Yep.
And I remember at the time you had an agent and you were trying to find a publisher and you were going through this very long journey and you were almost at a point of despair thinking I'm almost ready to give up. I don't think I'm ever going to get this thing published. And I remember saying just keep chipping away, you'll get there, and look how things have changed. So can you tell us a little bit about that publishing journey?
Yes, yes, certainly. Um, well, it probably started about 9 years ago, and it started with a local writers' critique group, really, and I was getting a lot out of that. It was all supposed to be a hobby. It was all supposed to be a bit of fun and to keep me occupied because, for one reason or another, which I won't go into, I ended up retiring quite early. And I had to have something, to keep myself busy and my mind active. And I'd always liked the idea of writing. And the people in this group were absolutely fabulous. They were a marvelous, marvelous group and gave me a lot of encouragement. So I mentioned before we went on air that we had the opportunity to write these 500-word stories every fortnight. And, people were responding really positively to those. So then I started to think about a novel and wrote one and tried to get it published, didn't get anywhere. But it was actually the bracelet, an early draft of the bracelet that caught an agent's eye. And it's an agency that was set up particularly to help debut authors. And the man who runs it, uh, I mean, the opportunity that I was given was just phenomenal. He he gave me the benefit of a professional editor to raise this book to publication standards, and I thought it was finished, as we often do at one stage or another with our books. And I would say we Andrea and I worked on that book for at least another 6 months, getting it ready, and then the agent started sending it out on submission. And we got some nice feedback. We didn't just get the "I'm sorry, this doesn't suit our list" sort of letters that are fairly bog standard in the industry. People had seemed to have read it and were commenting on very specific things about it, but there was always a but, but we don't quite know where it fits in the market, or I don't know, other things like that. So in the meantime, I was writing the photograph, getting the photograph ready, and we felt that maybe the photograph had a bit more commercial appeal. So I put it to the agent that we paused submitting the bracelet and focused on the photograph instead. And even then, it took a long time to find a publisher, but eventually that happened. And of course, I had this second completed manuscript just sitting there waiting. So um, once once the photograph was out there, and I had some time to uh, give another book a bit of attention, I offered it to them, and they said they'd like to publish that one as well. So yes, it's in reverse order, but who cares?
Yes. And it's a real success story. I'm so pleased for you because I know the just the anxiety you were going through at that time around the sense of hopelessness, and that all the work that you'd put in had, you had secured an agent and all this work, and you just could not get this thing published. But it just goes to show persistence and playing the long game. Suddenly a door can open, and now both are published. So yeah, congratulations on that, and that's a real sign of your tenacity to keep pushing on.
Yes, yes. Well, you're right. I mean, there was a point where I just thought, no, I can't keep doing this. And the group that you'd mentioned, we would often do a round table where it was like an update, what's everyone doing right now? And I just kept repeating the same story again and again and again. And I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't sit here and
Did
go through
did
the same things.
did you ever consider self-publishing it?
Oh, look, people, yes, definitely, I did. But I don't know. I just had this thing that I, I, I just wanted to feel that it had reached a standard where a publisher would be interested.
Mhm.
So I don't know what that says, but that was always at the back of my mind. I just wanted that external um, what
Recognition.
recognition, I suppose, that it was good enough to be published
Mhm.
by a publisher. Yeah.
Do you think you would have given up? Because I think you were asking yourself those questions around, I don't know why I bother anymore. I just don't know if I can keep going with it. Disappointment after disappointment. I guess I asked this question as a learning for other writers, and we've all been through this.
Mm,
You get to a point where you start to really doubt yourself, and am I good enough? Why am I subjecting myself to this? I'm getting nothing but rejections. You can't help but take it personally.
mm.
Did you feel that you're at a point where you almost gave up?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it was probably one of those nights when I had that heart to heart with you. Um, so um, I think if it hadn't come soon after that, I probably would have done. Yes, I think I would. I, and my agent was also beginning to feel like he'd knocked on, um, that there weren't that many more doors to knock on, really. So yes, it has been a long haul.
And just my thoughts, maybe as a bit of a tangent, and uh, sort of following on from on Harry's comment about self-publishing. My thoughts to or comments to anyone that might be listening to this is that despite that feeling of helplessness and wanting to throw your hands in the air and give up, my advice is don't.
Mm,
You should congratulate yourself for having written and completed a manuscript and getting it to a point where it's, you felt it was as good as you could possibly do and it's ready for publication. And we all know how hard it is to get picked up by an agent, and let alone a traditional publisher, and in all the various forms that they come. But I'm a very strong advocate. I went through this road where after rejections, I was probably almost thinking about giving up. But I felt I wanted to get my first novel out there, so I ended up doing a course for the Queensland Writers Centre and was given some advice, and I ended up self-publishing my first novel, and that sort of leveraged me to start to create my author profile, social media, start doing some proactive work with my novel. I was still very proud of it. And then it led to other opportunities as well. So my advice to authors is stick with it. Believe in stay the course, believe in yourself, and in whatever form, I really think that's where the self-publishing can definitely help emerging authors to get themselves into the industry, get that foot in the door and get started. And as you did, keep writing, keep producing more manuscripts, and if while you're waiting for success, write another one. And I'm actually in the middle of one at the moment. I'm 30,000 words in. I've completed a manuscript last year. You just got to keep going.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. However, you know, self-publishing isn't the recipe to sending out half-baked books. You've got to make sure that you've actually got a product that people are wanting to read before
Yeah,
you self-publish.
yeah.
And that is very important. So basically, if you are toying with the idea of self-publishing, you need to get it in front of readers who will be honest with you and give you the feedback that you need to hear. Because if you can get a good group of people who are going to give you honest reviews and say, nah, you need to work on this,
Mm.
um, send it off to editors, get their opinions, and make sure that it is a product that is acceptable, and readers are going to want to read it.
Mm.
And there aren't millions of mistakes and typos and, sort of dropped sort of storylines and all those sort of things, because that's what gets self-publishing a bad name
Mm.
if you publish a half-baked book. But there are tons and tons and tons of self-published books that are brilliant, and for me, I'm not saying mine's brilliant, but I'm just too I'm too impatient to wait for publishers to publish mine. Yeah, I can turn around a novel in a year, which is, from concept to publication, which is incredibly difficult to do in the traditional press.
That's right. Yes, you're right. And I absolutely agree with the business of getting professional help. I think if you're writing for a hobby, and for just for pure enjoyment, then whatever. But
Yeah,
if you've got ambitions in the way of competitions or publication, then yes, definitely. I don't think there's any shortcuts to um, getting an editor, having a manuscript assessment, a mentor, um, at the very least, a good beta reader group. You've
yeah,
got to
yeah.
have those people.
And my thoughts
Essential.
are, and I understand what you're saying, Diane, that you had, you held yourself to very high standards and you had goals, and I kind of feel the same myself. That I've always felt, just that idea of being published with a publisher is a bit of validation. But again, we all know how bloody difficult it is, and some fantastic authors and books have been rejected, and we know that. But again, I think for those people who do treat themselves seriously, they've educated themselves, they've studied, they know what it takes to pitch properly and professionally to agents and publishers, and that's the goals. I still think maintain those standards and maintain those goals and keep striving for that if that's what you choose to do. But I still think self-publishing has a valid place in the market. And again, if you get to the point of absolute roadblock after roadblock and you just have run out of all options,
Mm.
self-publishing is a great opportunity for the reasons I've stated, but keep writing and keep producing more and keep
Keep
striving for
writing.
those, and eventually you'll snag something. And I think, as Harry said, I think self-publishing has received a bit of bad press mainly because an oversaturation of books that have been published that weren't ready to be published because people didn't invest in editors and they were just a little bit too impatient. And I think I was probably guilty of that as well. So, we all like to see our name on the cover of a book.
Even if it's a pseudonym.
Yeah, yes, someone else's name. Diane, can we move on to another topic relating to your professional background as a speech pathologist,
Yeah.
um, and how the skills that you learnt as a speech pathologist, how that dovetailed into your writing skills, things like active listening and observing communication styles, observing people, and how that lended itself to character development. Can you talk us through a little bit about that?
Mm. Well, yes, those are the core skills, really. Sitting, listening, watching. Communication is multifaceted. It's speech output, but it's also non-verbal communication. I worked a lot with people with disabilities, so actually non-verbal communication was often a greater part of their interaction than verbal communication. So I think it's given me an ear for dialogue and an eye for interaction, um, facial expression, gesture, all of those body movements, all of those sorts of things. Um, I love dialogue. I absolutely love dialogue. Any sort of plot progression of a plot, if I can use dialogue to sort of move the story along, I do. And people comment that the dialogue is very realistic. And I think another skill that we were taught was that you transcribe what you hear, not what you think you hear. And I think narrative requires a certain adherence to the rules of grammar and all the rest, but dialogue's not like
Dialogue
that
doesn't.
at all. And so being able to authentically put words on the page that sound like real speech. I think, I don't know, maybe my background has helped me to do that. I mean, we would literally get slapped on the knuckles if what we were transcribing really wasn't what someone had said. It was what we thought we ought to write. So yeah, so it was good training in that regard. I mean, the difficulty is, of course, that if you transcribe speech perfectly, there'd be so many ums and ahs and transgressions and, you know, roundabout descriptions of things. It would be such a schmozzle that there has to be a balance between real speech, actual speech, and dialogue that
is engaging,
is readable for the reader. But very often mine will start off much more authentically, and then I'll just look, you know, I'll play with it and look at it until I feel I've got that balance between, you know, real speech and readable dialogue, if that makes sense.
Is there, I mean, I just got to ask this, is there a difference between a speech pathologist and a speech therapist?
Not really.
No, I didn't think so.
Yes. Well, no, it's not even not really, it's no. Um, in the UK, I was a speech and language therapist, but
Right.
here we are speech pathologists.
Where did you work in the UK?
Oh gosh, I started off in Kent, and
Yeah.
and right at the tip of Kent, Margate, Broadstairs, Ramsgate, that area. Then went to South Wales, and then in later years to the west of London. When I met my husband and married, we were living to the west of London. So,
Yeah.
but and then worked here for many years too. So
The reason I ask is my sister's, well, she's actually just retired as a speech therapist for about 40 years or something like that. But yeah, she had the difficulty of working in County Durham and that sort of area, and you know, working out. She worked with kids and working out what was normal speech for the dialect that is up there to how it actually relates to what you know, that's not the correct, or that's no, that's not an impediment. That's how they speak up here. You know, it was quite a learning experience there.
yes, and I guess that sort of it's all related, really. Communication is unique to the environment where, you know, someone lives and grows up, and so you can't impose your own
Values.
ideas on
Yeah.
that at all. And so, I mean, can I go on, Jack,
Go
and
for it.
just talk about how that sort of, I think also is interesting from a writing perspective, is that, you know, we're all such unique communicators, and you'll both know that you can answer a telephone call and the person on the other end doesn't say who it is, but you'll know within a few words, and that can be a really important character trait, you know, the sound of their voice, then their sort of speech mannerisms, if you like, for want of a better word, you know, their personality, the things they like to talk about, that there's so much that you can inject into a character by way of their communication patterns, if you like. And so when you're writing, there's that idea that if you're writing well enough, you don't have to ascribe a name,
Yeah.
said John, said Mary, that if it's good enough, you should be able
You'll
to
know who's talking.
and that's the challenge that I love about dialogue is, well, can I do that? Can I make someone's speech or communication such an important part of their character, along with, hair color, eye color, this, that, and the other, that you instantly recognize that person on the page. And it's not easy. It really isn't. Sometimes the English language kind of lets us down a bit in that regard, to have those words that are able to describe someone's communication patterns to that sort of degree. But it's a great challenge. It's a great.
I think it's so important in the written media, the way that you're describing a character. Generally, if you think about it, the most, the you may sort of mention at the first, when you first have a character appear, what their hair color is, what their eye color is, etc., etc. You may not. However, you know, people forget that. Or your readers forget that, but they remember the way they talk or their
Yes,
mannerisms and things like that. And they're far more important than the way you describe the person in the first place,
exactly.
when they arrive. And so that's the thing about making sure your depth of your character is how they talk, their mannerisms and stuff like that. And that's essential to getting believable characters. Yeah.
Yes, and it's really interesting because if you go on the internet and you look for character profile templates, for example, it's full of all the stuff you just said first off, hair color, eye
Hair
color,
color. It doesn't matter.
height, weight, what sort of
Yeah.
clothes they wear, and then there might be one thing that says voice,
Mm.
and it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well,
Because you hardly ever repeat what their eye color is unless somebody's staring into them, and often you don't even bother saying the color. Then
no,
it's sort of most of it's about the way they talk and their
yeah,
dialogue, and maybe their size and stuff like that. But that can all be implied and the like. But yeah, the dialogue is so important.
yeah,
And Diane, when we're talking about that, we often hear about the character voice,
mm,
and it's a combination of how they say their words, whether it's an accent or slang or the way, the way they structure their sentences versus what they say.
mm,
And I guess, when you hear about the voice of the character, so if you're writing a story through the point of view of a particular character, what's their internal dialogue and what are they saying, which kind of gives the reader an indication of what they're thinking, and that then becomes that character's voice. But I guess what you're talking about is going to another layer of, not only is it just generally the character's voice. In literary terms, it's more about the actual structural way in which they speak. Things
Yeah.
like slang, sentence structure, that sort of thing. Is that a
yes,
fair comment?
yeah. I think that I think of communication at sort of three levels. So there's the how we communicate. So that's all about things like your vocal tone and the rate that you speak, and whether you've got, so with vocal tone, for example, if you've got a scratchy voice or a whispery voice or a harsh voice, or things like croaky voice, um, the rate that you speak, whether you're the sort of person that has a sort of nasal twang to your speech or not, and these are all within what we would term sort of regular communication. That's without particular sort of impediments or tics or things like that. But then there's well, what do people talk about, and then you're then thinking about people's backgrounds and culture and education and hobbies and interests and likes and dislikes and things like that. And then there's the why people communicate, which then leads into things like, then their personality, their motivations, what's their role in this story. Are they the hero of the story? Therefore, do they have those very determined character traits that, are going to battle their demons, or are they in a different role altogether? Are they there to actually be the hurdle to someone else's journey? And is that done because they're being, I don't know, deceptive in some way or difficult in some way? So, it's all of that. It's all of those sort of levels, really, and trying to create a really rounded and complete picture of a person. And I think that, if you can inject all of those things into the dialogue, then people come away with, a really full picture of who this person is.
Yeah, I'm guessing. I mean, I've transgressed in my books. I love putting in dialect, and I the advice that I've had, and we've had people on the podcast saying is, oh, you should never actually write out dialects and sort of how people actually talk, because you should imply it that they're from New York, and then the reader knows they're from New York, and you don't have to actually make it difficult for them to read the dialogue by abbreviating everything and stuff like that. But I just think that, yeah, okay, I agree. If it's a major character, that might be difficult.
Mm.
However, if it's a side character who comes in every so often, why not?
Mm.
So
Because
you're talking about phonetically, like
yeah,
you've got a Russian, I think a
there's
Russian in
there's a
your book.
character. He was actually quite a main character. There's a Russian
Yeah,
dude, but he puts things the way that Russians, speak English.
yeah.
Mm.
Um,
Or
and
someone
I
with
don't.
a really strong Scottish accent
It
or
was it
Irish
was
accent.
actually a Liverpool accent. I've got my Liverpool shirt on at the moment, so for everyone on YouTube. But yeah, I wrote a character. I mean, he's a small character. He's in several of the short stories in the books. But I thought, well, I'm going to write it how I know Scouse accent is. And for Australians, it's really hard to understand. But that's the reality. And so a lot of the other characters like sort of will then be looking blankly at him because they don't know what he's saying, or do you want somebody to translate for you and stuff like that. But if you don't put that phonetic sort of speech in, that sort of those sort of jokes and those sort of confusions are going to be lost
Mm.
because the reader knows what they said,
Yeah.
and I think I don't know. I mean, I've been told you shouldn't do it, but sometimes rules are there for breaking. So I tend to break it quite regularly just because I enjoy writing phonetically certain accents.
Yeah, and I think, at the end of the day, if the reader copes with it, then,
Yeah.
why not? I mean, I love an Irish author called Tana French, and she all her characters are Irish, and she does it mainly through dialect, so words and
Mm.
sentence structure, that sort of thing, rather than articulation. But even so, some of the ways you just get such a rich sense of that Irishness about the
Yeah,
book
absolutely. I
through
had a short story that one of my paramedics, it was actually based, I asked permission and I based this character on somebody who was larger than life, this very sort of funny character who was Irish. And I instead of, because she swore like a trooper, this character I had to put in, and I used fecking instead of the obvious replacement. And so there's lots of fecking in this short story. And my wife, when she was reading, she's like, "Oh, this can't be true. You can't do this because they're swearing way too much, and they wouldn't do that in front of the patients." And I'm like going, uh, "No, no, she does. She swears a lot, and
yeah.
actually, I've toned it down. It would be a lot worse if it was actually her. It's one of those things that often the truth is a little bit different."
Yeah, that's right. No, Tana French uses specking a lot too.
But this is such a sorry, Diane. This is such a difficult thing to pull off. Do you think to be able to do all these things that we've been talking about um, in the written form? I think this highlights the craft of writing versus if you are writing a screenplay, a stage production, and you've got actors who can act these voices and dialogue. You know, the actors do the, or if it's an audio book, the
Mm.
voice actors they do the work for the author. But as the author of the written form, it's almost like I think this capturing authentic dialogue, as we've talked about, it's a skill, such a difficult skill to do well. Do you think?
Oh,
You you go for it,
Well,
Diane.
I think it is, but I'm asking you whether you agree with me.
I think it depends how much you love it. I think because I love it, I do put a lot into it, and hopefully it kind of works. Um, but I think it is just opening your ears, to
Yeah,
what you're hearing. And
yeah.
I mean, you often hear that advice, don't you? If you overhear an interesting conversation in a coffee shop, write it down. And all I would say is write what you hear, not what you
Yes.
think you've heard,
Mm.
Yeah.
and then see if you can do something with that, or learn something from it,
Mm.
um, because you may not use that exact conversation, and you probably shouldn't really if it's a real one, but you might learn something that you can apply to a conversation in your writing.
Yeah, I mean, I like using abbreviations to contractions and the like to give that sort of feeling and I often also like ellipsis because
Mm,
people pause when they're talking. There's lots of pauses, and I like throwing in a few pauses to give that more natural feel to the dialogue be able to sort of give it that sort of authentic sort of flavor to it. I don't know. I hope it works. I have had people say my dialogue's good, so you just go, well, I'll carry on doing what I'm doing.
And I like what you said earlier, Diane, about using dialogue to convey messages and story. I personally prefer dialogue. I find
Yeah.
dialogue easier to write as opposed to a descriptive scene. I find that when I get into a scene where it's a really engaging, whether it be a conflict situation or it's a battle of wills or whatever, or a police interview with a suspect, I love that. And I find I could just write and burn up word count so easily because I'm just so engrossed in this. You know, you immerse yourself in this conversation, and I think you implant yourself into the action.
Mm.
And that's why I really prefer. I find the scenes where there's a lot of dialogue, I can just write page after page so quickly. And then I start. Then if they're arriving at a location, for example, my detectives arrived at a sawmill, and I had to describe the sawmill and the observations and the machinery and the trucks and the smells. It took me a while to grow, and there was only a short paragraph of descriptive text. Um, I soldiered through that, but once they started talking, boom, I couldn't stop typing. So, um, and
mm,
I love dialogue to tell a story.
mm,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Another thing I like about dialogue, if it's been told through a character's point of view, where the narrator is telling the reader what they're thinking, but then what they say conflicts with their thoughts. You know, the fact that
Mm,
humans are unreliable. We don't often, or quite often, we don't say what we're really thinking. And I like those authors that are very clever in the way they do that, whether, they talk about the unreliable narrator, but even, when the character says, I'm hating this, I'm hating this situation, and you can hear their internal thoughts, but then they say something that completely because they don't want to say what they don't want to offend someone and how they use that as
Yeah.
a skill.
mm.
Definitely.
Okay, so there's a lot of takeaways there in terms of dialogue. We're probably getting to a stage where we should start looking at wrapping up. So before we do pull up stumps, you've got the launch of your second published novel, The Bracelet, at the here in Brisbane at the Chermside Library on the 29th of March. So what's installed? Are you looking forward to that? I said there's been a lot of activity in promoting a book launch.
Yes. Well, I yes, I mean, I am a little bit embarrassed in a way that it's come it's come relatively soon after the first one, but you can't let these opportunities slip by, can you? So
Absolutely not.
yes, it's at the Chermside Library, just an hour and a half on a Saturday afternoon. It will probably follow a fairly typical sort of pattern, I guess. A bit of mingling to start with, a bit of afternoon tea, probably a Q&A, and you know, some book sales and book signings. I don't think it's going to blow people's socks off in terms of something wild and different. But I hope that that people come and hear enough about the book to, you know, to want to give it a try.
You want to come up with some sort of bracelets and hand them out to people who turn up.
I've bought myself. I have. Can I get it? Hold on.
We'll just tap dance.
Da, 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 da.
Don't know any good jokes, Harry?
I can't actually.
Not that I could put on a podcast.
So this was my prop for the photograph.
Uh-huh.
Because the teddy bear had a photo stuck in the back of its waistcoat, and there is one in here somewhere.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Just poke it out. There we go.
Yeah.
So he comes with me on my promotional things for the photograph, and I can't go and get the bracelet because it's down the other end of the house. But I have actually bought myself a bracelet that matches the book cover.
Excellent.
So if I can just, this isn't it. I mean, it's actually, I did a mock-up. It's actually covering up the photograph. But that's what the book cover is like. So you can see the bracelet sort of features quite strongly in that. And the one I've bought is very similar. So I've got my prop for this next one.
I don't think I could have done that if I'd done a book launch for my first book, Dead Regular. It would have been a bit awkward if I brought a dead body along, since that's what's on the cover of mine. I'm sure there'd be some sort of workplace health and safety that would get me into trouble.
I think so.
It might have made some news. Cadaver at book launch.
Yeah.
Well, Diane, good luck for your book launch. I'm sorry I can't be there. I discovered I'm double booked on that that date. I'm delivering a crime writing workshop at another library, so I can't be there.
And
But
unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it because theoretically I'll be on a boat. So yeah, we pick up our yacht on the 24th. So that's down in New South Wales. So I will be maybe sailing up towards Brisbane at that point.
Well, you're both forgiven because
thank you.
you have good reasons. So
So anyone who's in Brisbane, check it out and show Diane a bit of support and love. And if you can, come along to her book launch at the Chermside Library on the 29th of March. We'll put a link to your website on our podcast so people can know where to find you on social media and your website. So congratulations on you've stuck the course. You got there in the end, and you fast tracked your second book. It's now out, or it's coming out very soon. So congratulations, Diane, on the publication of your novels. I'm sure there's more to come. Actually, I did have one other question. You did mention earlier in our conversation tonight you had another manuscript that nothing happened with.
well, yes,
Is it never to see the light of day, or is it? Can you breathe new life into that?
you might remember, and you know, I feel so embarrassed about this in front of you know, someone who used to do this for a living. But I did try and write a crime novel years ago, and I don't really know whether I've got the skill for it. But it wasn't a police procedural, really. It was actually a will they get away with it rather than a who done it. You actually found out straight away what had happened and who had committed the crime. It was more about will they get away with it. And I still love the characters in that story, but it wasn't very well written. I really didn't understand things like point of view and things like that.
You can always edit it though.
I know I could resurrect it, and I also had this idea that I could maybe sort of mess with the timeline so that it made the reveal kind of more dramatic somehow.
Yeah.
But I've just never had the time to go back to
What you got to remember is that there are very few um, detectives that have actually turned authors.
I,
Vast majority of people who write about crime don't know the first thing about police procedure. They ask, and they contact people like Jack to give them advice as to how to do it. So, don't worry about writing a crime novel when you're not a police officer, because that's a rarity.
yes, I do I do know that, but I also have read Jack's books, and they are just so authentic and good. But we'll see, or maybe I'll start something else altogether. I don't know.
I guess it's like anything. I think we all start by writing badly, and that's part of the apprenticeship of learning the craft. And when you can look back and look at your early writing, I've spoken about this a number of times with mine. My first attempt was awful. At the time, I thought it was great, but when you develop and you have the foresight to look back and say, you know what, that was crap, but at least I can now see that. And then I guess you just got to, getting those words up is all part of doing your traineeship and your apprenticeship, and writing badly is a good way to learn. But then you just make that decision: do you notch that up to experience, and just put it aside and think it's not worth, because sometimes it is harder to edit something that's really bad than just to start again and from the beginning write better. So I guess you got to make that decision. Has it
Yeah,
got the potential? And that's only something you can decide. But maybe, who knows? You might come back to it. I've heard of a number of authors who pulled an old manuscript out of the cobwebs and they breathe fresh life into it. So you just never say never.
no, that's right.
But a CPR to bring it back.
Yeah. Yes. Put those pads on, give it electric shock, and yeah. Look, on that note, we should say goodbye. It's been a fantastic chat. So, Diane Clarke, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on what you've achieved and for being persistent. Good luck with your book launch, and we will continue to watch your career with interest.
Well, thank you both. It's been a really good fun, and best of luck to you both too with your writing journeys. So thank you.
Many thanks. It's been lovely talking to you.
And you. Thanks. Bye for
Bye
now.
now.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.